Hello, everyone. Good morning. We'll give everybody a few minutes before we get started. Are you all able to find the link under the announcements easily? Yeah.
No, I had to look under the July 23rd announcement.
So in the event, right. So there's pinned Zoom link for all of our meetings is under the announcements.
So yeah, I was looking for today's date, so I was confused for a little
Only
while.
one link for every single event we have. It's a recurring link for every single one, no matter what day we're on. It's
Okay.
at the top of the group under announcements.
So I still don't see that. Oh, I feel so inadequate.
You hit when you go to the very top post, probably when you come into the group, and you hit the three little dots. There's more than one announcement, so they layer one another. But if you click the little three dots on the right hand, upper. So what post is at the very top of the page when you go to the top of the page?
I only see to access Google. Actually, let me share my screen. Maybe. Oh, I can't share screen.
I'll share mine.
Okay.
And show you. So when you first come into the page, it's probably that none of that is there, but.
That's what, okay, so that first announcement is what I see.
Right, and you see it says see all?
I don't think I have that. Hang on. No, it doesn't say see all.
Does it say anything?
Nope.
No, I don't see that either for some reason.
Okay, do you have a menu on the side that says announcements?
Yep.
Says, about discussion announcements.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there it is.
You see the Google Classroom is going to be pinned. If it's a video that's only being shared on Facebook, that's going to be pinned to help people find it. Then basically how the group works. A new Zoom link has been created and posted in the announcements, pinned to the top of the page. And then the whole menu of recurring meetings, all with the same Zoom link.
Oh, so it's in the comments of, okay.
No, it's a post.
Oh, it's a post. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Let's see.
That's kind of odd. It looks like maybe the setting on Facebook changed to where you might have to set announcements as the default view, which never was the case before when in groups, but
So many changes. You
yeah.
look up and you're like, why does it look different? Where's my button?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Happy we clarified.
Yeah, no, okay, so I pulled the link from the Google Classroom. I'm trying to be good about my new classroom. Yep, so it's there too. Yep, in the Google Classroom. Here's the link to the post. Okay, all right, well, you are here. I am glad you made it. Let me just change my view. Change my view here. Okay, I want to know who all we have in the room. So let's do quick intros. If you can tell us like what kind of work you do in the birth or postpartum space, like in the DMV area. And yeah, like how long you've been doing this work. I'll start with Jenny, you're at the top.
Sure. I'm Jenny Bennett. I started practicing as first a childbirth educator, and then soon after that, a doula. Once I started getting students, and they were like, "Hey, come to my birth." I was like, "Oh, I guess I better train as a doula." That was about 8 years ago. I started in Atlanta, where I'm from, and then 4 years ago, going almost 5, I moved here for my husband's job. And so I do the same work now that I did when I started, and with the addition of my work as a doula educator for Doula Trainings International.
Thanks for joining us. The person on the other side of me is Mia.
Hi, I'm Mia. That's my nickname. So my name's Michelle Brown Eckert, and I run Tower of Health LLC. So I'm a naturopathic doctor and doula, and I just came out here in the fall from Portland, Oregon, and I've been in practice for since 2015. And I in Oregon you can do the naturopathic midwifery program, and then you can do 10 more births and take the NARM exam, which a lot of midwives there do for the Washington State midwifery license. So I'm working on the midwifery portion, but I do see families and children of all ages. And so I'm just trying to figure out how to get business here in Maryland and learn all the different rules and just be part of like what's going on in current events. And I'm also a notary. I guess it was more popular for during birth work. Everyone seemed to need a notary right after their births, and they had to get up and like go to the bank or something. But I don't see that much of a need here, so I thought I'd try it. So
I'm so curious about that. Tell me about that. Why are people, what's legal happening?
And that's why I'm trying to figure out Maryland. So in Oregon, I feel like a lot of it was the birth certificate, or if the parents partners are married, or like was the mom like legally married to somebody else, but the father is someone else. It just seemed like every fifth home birth we went to, someone needed a notary to get all of their paperwork and birth certificates, and just trying to say, oh, we don't want you to get out of bed, but if you're out, go get this notarized as soon as possible. So yeah, I kept thinking I wanted to do that in Oregon. I was so busy, and here I wasn't, and then I haven't gotten called, but I figure I'll have that certification just in case.
Okay.
Mia,
now
do you have
you're
Mia,
out.
do you have a page for your naturopathic business that you could put in the chat, or?
Yeah, I can put that in the chat. Yep.
Yeah. Where do you provide support?
You mean the areas, or?
Mhm.
So I'm actually in Easton, Maryland, and I'm set up to do telehealth.
Okay.
And I'm actually licensed in Maryland, Oregon, and Washington. But I did do a house call. I think it was about an hour and a half away, or hour and a half to 2 hours away from where I live. So I'm also set up to be really mobile. And then with all the COVID things, I haven't actually set up like an office space just because, I don't know, it seemed a little bit safer to try to do the house calls and do the telehealth for now anyways. So, but yeah, I can put my website in the chat, and I'm trying to update it so that like when all of that changes, I can let people know. But yeah, I usually always offer like a 15-minute consult if someone wants to know more about what options I have.
Good to know. All right. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, Samantha, I see you next.
My name is Samantha Jade. I go by Sam quite frequently. I am a birth doula. I'm a novice birth doula. I started practicing in December, so it's been an amazing 8 months, 8-9 months during COVID. And I'm enjoying the work so far, really, really enjoying the work. Oh, and fun fact, Mia, I'm originally from Washington State. I was born on Whidbey Island, so cool.
There's always connections, aren't they? Susanna.
Hi, I'm Susanna. I am a postpartum doula certified through DONA. I started in July of 2014, but I am currently on a little bit of a break. I lived in Northern Virginia for 13 years, and most of my practice was in Northern Virginia. And then October of 2018, my husband lost his job, and very shortly after that got a job out in Harford County in Abingdon, Maryland. So I'm kind of out past Baltimore towards Philly. And about a little over a month after we moved, I found out I was pregnant with an IUD. That was fun. And so I am currently, I was hoping to start back into my postpartum work in March, but then COVID hit, and I had a 6-month-old baby at the time, and I figured, you know what, this is just a sign to wait. So I'm not currently practicing. And I also, for about 1.5 years, was working with the Sacred Postpartum program with the Sacred Living Movement, but I just want to be clear in public that I have separated ways very strongly with them, and I am no longer associated with the Sacred Living Movement or Sacred Postpartum. Partly because of what we are working on here, and partly for cultural appropriation and things like that. So I just want to be very clear that I am no longer associated with them. And when I do start back up, I am going to be doing a little bit more of postpartum and pregnancy life coaching, a little bit similar to what would be sort of distance postpartum work until I feel comfortable leaving my baby and going into people's homes again. And I just need to get my website updated and up to date. So I've been doing this, I don't know, I'm almost up for my 2nd renewal of my certification.
Wonderful. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Angela, you are up next.
Hey everybody, I'm Angela Torres. I live in Northern Virginia. Where do I live? I don't know. This is the longest I've lived anywhere in my entire adult life. We are a retired military family. I started as a birth doula in 2007. I've done postpartum work. I'm a breastfeeding counselor. say all these things, but I'm not really doing that much of the work anymore. I recently stepped down as the admin of the DC area birth worker group. It's because things are, you know, they don't tell you when you have babies that they need you more when they're grown up. And I've been saying more yes to my family and trying to be there more for them as they're getting older. I have, and I say that I'm not doing this work. I said my last birth was the one I did in New Jersey in the end of January, but I had a former client call me and beg 2 weeks ago. So apparently I'm going to be going to another birth in the spring of next year. So no matter how far I try to step away, I never can get that far away from birth work. But here we are, and here I am, and I am honored to be in this space with you, continually learning. Because Reve, every time you post something to do work on, I'm like, So I am just like thrilled. I'm glad my minions are occupied today, because this one really spoke to me as I sat sweating in the car waiting for my child to have his wisdom teeth out, sweating yesterday. So.
Yeah, I heard it's really, really warm there. Really, really warm. Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad you joined us. And it sounds like you're not able to retire, but you're just ramping down. Ramping down.
Yes, I keep trying.
Yeah, you keep trying. Yeah.
Keep trying.
They'll keep finding you too.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thanks.
So then we have Whitney. Whitney, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Hi, guys. This is me running down the street right now, which is why I don't have my video on.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to make this call. I live in DC and practice mainly in DC. I am a postpartum doula. I am also out of breath in the DC heat wearing a mask. So I apologize for my heavy breathing.
Yes.
I was certified through DONA in 2012. And these days I do a lot less one-on-one with clients. And I run a space called Lemon Tree, which is a play space and this community space for families. Sorry, I'm like running. So I also run new moms groups, which I have one at 1 p.m. and I was at my office and realized I didn't have any of my breastfeeding pillows. So I had to run home and I'm running back. So I run, which I actually don't need because all of our groups are virtual right now, but having all of my props helps me to show techniques even from afar. So now I just mainly run Lemon Tree, although we are figuring out a different way to operate in the current climate when we're based on communities and communities can't technically be together right now. So we are transitioning to a nonprofit currently so that we can better serve our families. And yeah, that's me. I'm just really happy to be here. And hopefully I'll be in my office in a second and to be more present for this call.
Okay, that's great. I understand the hustle, you know, it's inconvenient, but we can do it. So, all right. Well, we're happy to have you. Weigh in when you can. Okay, so today we're talking about unpacking, what is it? Unpacking white privilege. I'm distracted. Hold on. Let me pull it up. Unpacking white privilege, which was a video done at the Red Table with Jada Pinkett Smith and her daughter Willow and her mother Adrienne, and then Rachel Cargo. How many of you follow her on her platforms? Rachel. So she.
I hadn't, but I will now.
I do.
Who said that, Sam? Or who said that? I do.
Whitney. I think
Whitney, I do.
Okay. Yeah, so I think just like the video said, like she started out as a nanny and was at the women's rally, took a photo that was shared like in the video clip, and it found herself in this space talking about race, feminism and like Black women, like in all the intersections. So she's tons of followers. Like, so on Instagram, is probably the main platform. So good to connect with her. So that's Rachel Cargle, Cargle. We will, you will start to see more of her resources shared after we get through this first wave of learning opportunities and whatnot. Then there was Amy Newman, who's a writer, and then Justina Machado, who are actresses. So they were around the table with Jada, her daughter, and her mom, unpacking, you know, white privilege. So, and prejudice. So overall, when you watched, so typically what I do with the calls is have people go around and share like one of their aha moments or their takeaways, so we can make sure we cover what you need. And then I definitely have questions or things that I want to cover. So anybody want to jump in with something that you were like, I want to talk about this when I get with a group of people, I want to cover this. And if not, I definitely have some that I can start out with, but I want to hear from you if you have something that's burning.
Again, heavy breathing. Sorry, my friends. I'm sure everybody's heard heavy breathing before, but I just the very beginning spoke to me a lot when they were sort of doing the introduction. And I think the whole idea of why do white women need a woman of color to help them through this process, and just talking through why is it, was helpful to me. And I think, or just sparked things. And I don't really know, I can't define it. I do feel the need sometimes to be like, I wish I had somebody to hold my hand. And I think it stems from finding out, but realizing that even if we thought that we were allies all along, and then realizing we weren't doing it in the best way, and then feeling like, okay, well, we've done it wrong. Now, how do we do it right? Maybe, I don't know. But I do sometimes feel the urge, and I know that it's not a woman of color's responsibility, but why do we feel that way?
Good question. I would offer that your white privilege makes you feel that way. So because you don't have to actually do the work, and you're generally, part of white supremacy is perfectionism, and you don't want to get it wrong. You're waiting for somebody to make it safe for you, or to help teach you or lead you so you don't have to get it wrong. It's a little bit part of the privilege, my opinion.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I just don't, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you know, it's one of the ways that it operates. It's one of the ways it's operating here in this group. Susanna.
So one of the things that was interesting to me was also watching sort of the generational opinions between their family. And I have been observing this in my community. So I'm Jewish, and I have a lot of friends who are older, many of which are children of immigrants who are also Holocaust survivors, and they have a real big problem with the concept of the privilege part of the white privilege, and they can't like see it as one word almost, like they can't see themselves that this is about them, the fact that when they're being seen without them ever saying anything about themselves or their demographic or their religion or whatever, that they have a step ahead. And I thought it was interesting that there seems to be this generational difference, especially in any community, it seems. And I thought that was really interesting to listen to, like Willow versus Jada versus her mom, talking about their reaction to a lot of this stuff and allowing white women in their space, and how that is present in a lot of different places. And how many arguments have stemmed in those generational spaces, probably everywhere, specifically related to race. That was like a really interesting place to think for me.
Yeah, I think the intergenerational stuff is fascinating, and we can't ignore it, because what our parents or grandparents experience we're having still a different experience, and yet the same structures are at play and having an impact on us. It's just showing up differently. Yeah. So for the women that you, the people you're referring to, they don't see themselves as white. Is that the disconnect from the two words, white privilege?
It's a combination. So it's a combination of them saying, well, I'm not like every other white person because my parents are from Hungary and I grew up in Williamsburg, and we dressed so differently that people didn't see us as regular white people. And they can't seem to separate the fact that like they experience prejudice and anti-Semitism, but it's not the same as white privilege. And I think that word, like my mom has even talked about how like the word privilege is a really hard one for her because, you know, and my friend, one of them in particular I'm thinking of, who grew up in Williamsburg, like she was very poor, she didn't have food all the time, a lot of these things. And so they think of privilege a lot about money and not about just being a step ahead because of their skin color. And that is like a hard place for them to understand. And when they feel like they had all of these other forms of prejudice, that they are therefore can't be privileged, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. That's interesting. Thank you. Samantha left a comment in the chat.
This is the term I've heard describing, and I think, yeah, this has applied to Judaism quite a bit over the years. Maybe today, maybe not. I'm not sure. Like, but I know, like in years past, Jewish people have been sort of on the fringe of whiteness. But I think we also, that's interesting. I think we also have to recognize that, you know, Jewish people have been able to thrive in this country because of the way that they look. And that's how communities in Williamsburg have been able to gather enough capital to create the sort of fringe community that they have created. So yeah, so while I'm sort of in agreement about being on the fringe, we also have to recognize there is still some privilege in there too. Yeah, but that's interesting. That nuance is really interesting to me.
Yeah, and it does seem to be a bit generational. So when we were in Alexandria, we belonged to a congregation there very near Old Town Alexandria. And it became clear maybe 4 years ago that there was sort of a lot of really, I want to say latent racism, but it was becoming less and less hidden as this sort of political world has been evolving. And so we actually joined up with a traditionally Black community in Old Town Alexandria so that we could kind of break down a little bit and understand, to kind of form a relationship with this community to discuss both anti-Semitism and racism in a place that felt better, and in hopes that it would do it. But it still seemed to be like a lot of the younger congregants were going and the older ones were like, I don't need to be a part of this conversation, which I found really frustrating. We just joined a new synagogue up here. Well, we were a part of a synagogue in Baltimore, and there was a lot of problems with, our congregation was really large, and there are members there that are Black community members who are Jewish, and they were being treated as, like, they would be asked if they're there to help somebody or if they were somebody's nurse, and it was really hard for them to feel like a part of this congregation. It was really bad. And this all happened right before COVID hit too, so there was all these plans to have conversations with Bridge, Maryland, to have more conversations and try and address all this stuff, and then COVID hit and it sort of got put on the back burner. But it happens all over the place, even as a place like Baltimore where you'd think it was so diverse and all that, but unfortunately it's still everywhere.
It's everywhere. Yeah, it's everywhere. Thank you for sharing that. We'll need to explore that more and as a group, for sure. Anyone else with immediate, like, takeaways from from watching the video where you were like, I'm so glad I watched this? Okay, so I have some. So my question for you, for those of you who are not BIPOC, how did you decide to take on doing the work of anti-racism work? Because you chose it, because you don't have to do it. What do you remember what made you say, I'm gonna actually be active and do this, I'm gonna show up?
Okay, I can tell you my personal place. A few years ago when Ina May said something stupid, I was in a group that was called like talking to white people about racism, and it was brought up, and I, like white women do, was like, but she's done so many good things. And it brought up a lot about like, what do you do when the people you idolize reveal themselves to be racist, or at least say racist things, or some aspect of that. And that's really what was like the trigger for me to initially start this work. And then when I was working, training people, postpartum workers through Sacred Living Movement, and I found so many problems with that program, I started really diving into how to like address making sure that people were aware of what people of color were experiencing in the birth world, and being that I knew I couldn't speak to it specifically, how to include women of color, because it wasn't a space that was inviting to them, and then questioning why and things like that. And it sort of started me down that path. And then this climate has deepened that path even further for me.
Okay, so birth work brought you to this path. Okay, Angela, how about you?
I would say birth work has definitely brought me to this path. When I first started as a birth doula, I was serving, strictly military clients, military families, and the military is a hugely, diverse place. It doesn't seem like it sometimes, but I could count more on one hand the number of white families that I served as opposed to families of color. And I felt very honored to be in that space. And then I came back here, and I came to a conference and was speaking with my mentor, who's white, and one of the people she works with who is of color. And I was talking to to them both. We were having dinner, and the most thing that really started to spark my questions about this was, I was talking about finding more research sources for families of color. And it's really only been recently that we've had books and pictures, and especially breastfeeding. I was tired of showing Black women white breasts. And holding my own white breast, because when we talk about breastfeeding, we're always touching ourselves. And Jerry looked at me and she said, and maybe they don't want to see you. And at first I was so taken aback. I was offended. And I was like, what do you mean? And what if I'm the only person in the community? And I was like, you know what, it's not about me. Where is my head? And that really pushed me to be like, okay, here's where it starts. And I'm really grateful that we live in a community here in DC that is so diverse and so full of resources. But even in the last few years, we're really just seeing that we haven't touched the iceberg of what's available to be able to make sure that our families in this community are being served by the people they should be served by and deserve to be served by. And that was one big push off for me. The other big push off is what I'm learning from my husband's family. I'm clearly very, very white. I grew up in Nebraska. I don't need to tell you how white I am. I married into a Spanish family from Puerto Rico. I am really grateful that there have been a number of discussions and videos that you've provided to us that are talking about caste system, something that I've just started teaching my homeschooler in the last couple of years, but I'm seeing how it's coming up in our family as my husband's parents are talking more and more about their past, that they've not been, I don't know what it is about getting old, but they are talking more and more about things that happened when they were younger, when they were getting married. And it all relates back to that caste system. And it's really, I don't understand. I never understood. I was never taught it. I didn't know anything about it until I'm almost 50 years old. And I think it's a small piece of the puzzle to really also understand in order to have a more complete picture of what our country is going through right now, particularly for my family. But I think it's just another piece of the puzzle, and I'm really grateful that was part of this discussion in this video. It was part of the discussion that I really wanted to sit in on yesterday and couldn't because I was waiting. And it's really helping me to peace and be able to have these discussions with my family, because the one thing that they said around the table was it starts at the dinner table. And we talk a lot about this stuff at the dinner table.
Yeah. Okay, I have follow-up questions. So how did you move from being offended? Because I'm navigating 2 white women being offended because I'm like, I'm going to say something, right? But they are like in it and they're like mad. So how did you move past offended? Because she told you the truth. And I generally say when you feel offended, it's what my grandmother always says, a hit dog hollers. Yeah, it landed. So it resonated with you. I'm right. But now what? How do you get out of being offended when you're being called out or somebody is bringing you into an awareness or holding up a mirror to you?
I think it's really just that somebody was so honest about their own truth that had never said that to me before. And I wasn't ready in the moment. But the more, even that evening, the more that we talked about it, I was like, yeah, I got to get out of my own head. I needed somebody to say that to me. I'm not right. I'm not right. And I shouldn't think that I'm right. And now I'm embarrassed because I'm offended and I'm a dumbass. Please, here we go again. Don't let me say anything else to piss her off, which she wasn't angry. But then I got afraid because now I'm 100% out of my element, and wow, do I have some learning to do.
Yeah, she blew up your world.
Yeah.
Because here you're showing up, you're like, I can help everybody. And then the fact that like now you're showing to be like, maybe I'm not the right one to help them. So second question, then how did you transfer your power? Did you did you precept for other lactation professionals? Who are of color? Did you help sponsor scholarships or, education? Did you bring them into an awareness about it as a possible profession?
Firstly, I continued to have more conversations with her because I wanted to make sure that I was, this is going to come out wrong.
No.
Yeah. I wanted to have a better understanding of where I looked at. She works for, the organization that she works for is incredibly diverse. And so I started poking into their community and figuring out, okay, so this is how they're doing it. I know this is available somewhere in DC. I haven't found it yet. And we weren't at that time, our community wasn't online and wasn't talking to each other as much as they are now. And that's kind of when I started reaching out, and I was still new to DC. So I didn't really know that many people, but really started reaching out. I started going to more trainings and meeting more people, particularly trainings in DC as opposed to trainings in Northern Virginia, and figuring out where these resources are. First of all, I don't know what the needs of the community are, so let me start surrounding myself with these other people who do know what the needs of the community are, and where what resources are already available, because it's no longer about me.
Yeah. So this is helpful because there will be people who are, you know, trying to figure out, how do I get out of the fence? What do I do? But also, how do I, now I have this new reality, what do I do with it? So, and it sounds like it took some time. There wasn't a quick reaction, but it took some time for you to figure out, to gather information and figure out how you can shift your power. Yeah.
Well, I think you have to do that. I think if you try to shift it too quickly, well, then you're trying to build something that might already be there that you don't know anything about anyway. And especially in a community this large.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. Okay, Whitney, what made you start doing anti-racism work?
Oh man, it's been a long, I have so many moments, right, where I've like started versions and then continued to get deeper and deeper. Mine is pretty personal, like family related. I grew up on a farm. My dad is a 5th generation farmer. So if you could just sort of imagine my family's history.
Yeah.
And I think I'll share 2 moments that have very personally, again, like professionally, I've had moments. But so my dad grew up on the same land that his great-grandfather had farmed, and obviously they had sharecroppers when he was growing up. Not obviously, they had sharecroppers when he was growing up. And those sharecroppers continued, like, I know them. They're one is still alive, she's 103. And they would come to dinners with us. We had a running farm, so they would come and join us, and it was this like very loving relationship. Like, we all grew up together, and it was really interesting. And it was like, oh, they were always introduced to us as like, oh, they lived here in this house, and I was like, wow, that's a really small house. But again, lots of dinners, lots of things. And there was probably 8 or 9 years ago, a meeting in my tiny hometown where I'm not even sure, it was like a city council meeting that focused on something topical for the Black community. And my dad saw it and was like, oh, I'll go. And he went, and one of the sharecroppers, her name is Bessie, and she stood up and spoke about how she was treated in her family and her growing up, and did not know my dad was in the audience. It's like, what? Like, we love you so much, and we've treated you with, like, you come to my house, you were at my house, 3 weeks ago for dinner, and why didn't you say this over the table? And he was just like heartbroken. And he was hearing these stories, right, that she was telling that his dad and his grandfather and his great-grandfather did. And of course, she was like, why would I feel comfortable to share this with you in your home? And so that brought a lot of discussions up with my family. And very similarly, a generation later, I, growing up, was often the only white person around. So it wasn't that I was uncomfortable, but I thought I was best friends with these people as a child, right? And they see me as the boss's daughter, and a very different thing. And I had a woman who, she was the manager of the farm, had been with my parents since before they opened, and she just ran everything. And she was like a mother to me. And she was diagnosed with cancer a few years ago. And as we were trying to support their family, they started cutting us off. And as she died, I did get to say goodbye to her. But as I'm standing in this room speaking to this woman who was literally a mother to me, but her family watching the way they looked at me, and I just had this like moment of, oh, every memory that I have, that's not how it was. That's how I viewed it. not how anyone else viewed it. And so I think both I had that moment and my dad had that moment separately in extreme examples. And so at that time, I had already, when Ella died, who was incredibly close with me, I'd already done not Rachel Cargill's, the white supremacy, me and my white supremacy handbook. And so I felt like, you know, I've been doing this work, like I understand it a little bit more. And then being in a room like that and really realizing, oh wow, no, I know nothing, was interesting. So that has propelled me forward. Whereas I was already doing the work, but I didn't have a concept.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. It is like a peeling back layers of an onion. You know, you might have the surface, and then you go deeper and deeper. Sharecropping is a part of my family story, and it instantly makes me mad. It makes me like tear up, because my great-grandfather was a sharecropper, and my family, they went back south and risked life and limb during harvest time to help them bring in what they needed to bring in to make sure that they could stay on the land, as you know, but they were always being cheated by Mr. Jolly. And my great-grandfather was 87 years old. He died when he was 97. He was 87 years old, still as a sharecropper, and basically owned by the white family that he lived on. My father actually remembers going down and to Tennessee and learning that they were going to a new home to visit his grandparents, because they have been sold to another landowner. He was a grown man. That's not that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, your reality is not our reality at all.
Mm-hmm.
Not at all. And I can only imagine what that Black family felt about you, who got the attention of Ella and her resources and her tenderness, and what they missed out on because she was tending and caring for you. So that's shared pain for sure. So I want to acknowledge that. As soon as I hear the word sharecropping, I'm like,
I know, and it's
so visceral for me.
I understand that, and it's a journey for me.
Yeah.
It's been a journey for my father, and I'll just share this one last tidbit of I'm struggling with the word and term in the bill, but my dad has really sort of that changed his life, as it should have, and he's been doing a lot of research, and so he found in Chicago there are a lot of there's this housing bill where a lot of and I'm sure somebody knows more than I do, but where a lot of African Americans were buying houses and thought that they were paying into them, but it turns out like they didn't, and so they thought they were buying in. And so he read about this and was just so furious and so upset and like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And then about 24 hours later, he was like, this is sharecropping. This is what we did.
Another version of it. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it was like, it took a separate scenario.
Yeah, because that's what the system does. It takes the power and shifts it. So slavery is not legal. We'll create sharecropping. Oh, now we have to still make money off of Black and brown bodies. So what do? Now we put them all in jail, and that fuels police, jail, prisons, all of the food, the housing. It's a whole nother system that fuels you know, sports is another one where Black bodies make white people lots of money, but it just morphs into something else because that's capitalism.
Right, but with our fragility, it's hard for us to see it when you're saying our example, right? But to see another example, you're like, oh, and then you can shift it. So maybe that, you know, you were asking how to speak to a person. Maybe that, I mean, it's absurd that you need to do that, but so that's my experience.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Jenny, you're up. Hi.
Hi. So my pathway to doing the work was similar to Susanna's in that it started with Ina May's comments several years ago. And, you know, we had been requiring our doulas to read one of Ina May's books. And so DTI took that book off of our reading list. And just in, you know, the opening of the eyes to the fact that this is going on in our own backyards, and wanting to respond to that in, you know, a deeper, more meaningful way. I joined up with, I had just moved here to the area and joined up with a group that was being led by Mandolin Restivo, who had done some anti-racist education for her church, a Universalist Unitarian church, I believe. And Mandy hosted an in-person meeting. And so I got to meet a few new people and make some connections there. And Mandy led a great discussion around, you know, what Ina May had said and what we as primarily white birth workers, you know, wanted to talk about what we should do to respond to that. And I believe there was only one woman of color who was at our meeting. And, you know, it's been kind of a neat, I guess neat is the only word I can come up with at the moment, experience to see it unfold, you know, down the road to where we are with it today. Reve, with you being so brave and resourceful, and your leadership has been great in picking up what we had started way back then. Mandy, I believe, took a step back from birth work, and so in-person meetings did not continue. And so we had done a little bit of taking the torch from Mandy and really trying to keep it regular, but having difficulty getting those in-person meetings to continue happening. I was able to help lead a book discussion around the book, Reproductive Justice and Introduction, a few months back. And that was really our first in-person meeting in, I think, about a year or so prior to that group first forming. So anyway, all of that to say, I just wanted to thank you, Reve, for, you know, for taking the reins with this. And it's been really important to see, you know, how this space that you've created has allowed more women of color, more BIPOC to BIPOC, I guess you would say, to join and to feel open and safe to share more, because that really, you know, my misconception, my learning point was that I thought that it should, I guess, be white women teaching other white women because of the idea of, you know, not asking you to do the emotional labor of it. But I think the point that I missed was that we can't always assume that that's the case. I mean, sometimes it is important to create space, and that's what you've done so well here, I think, is create space for a variety of voices. So that's why I'm here.
Oh, great. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, you know, I think, you know, I'm able to do this mostly because I've almost always, oh, a baby. Oh, hey girl, hey. Hi. That I, you know, I've always been in white spaces, so I don't mind having the conversation. I think the conversation doesn't feel laborious to me. what is laborious, what is emotionally draining is acting like it's not happening, working side by side and not having the conversation, but we know that it's happening. And feeling like we're the only ones, like women of color, fighting the fight. We can't. You have to do this work. I need y'all to be educated and informed. So if creating a space and showing up is, that is, I'm happy to do that, because we can't do this alone. Y'all have got to get in the fight. You have got to start having, like, using your spaces. Where's your sphere of influence? Rachel Cargill is on, Instagram. She's got all those followers. Well, you know what? I'm concerned about the followers sitting around your kitchen table, like Angela mentioned, or in your office, or on your team. And if you're an agency owner, or if you're a doula trainer, like, I am concerned about those humans that you're pouring into and what you're pouring into them, because I'm more likely to interact with them, because we are, I'm not physically in your community, but I own a business that is still there. And so I'm concerned about how we're shaping this community in the nation's capital, no less. Like, there's an opportunity for a lot of change to happen, but we can't do it on our own. So, for me, I never know how the conversation is going to hit me. So, like Whitney sharing her story, I was just like, oh, this is the thing. My dad, was just talking about this, history that my family shares, around sharecropping. And yet, there's, common ground, common experience. And yet we're the flip of a card. We're on opposite sides of the card. And generationally, this is how insidious slavery has been. She's got tears, I've got tears, it hurt, everybody's hurt. And we're all trying to find a way forward together. So yeah, and birth work, links us. So thank you for sharing. I wanna have another question. I wanna bring the Latina piece in, because, it's not as, typically we are talking about Black and white. So Angela, you speak to your husband is Puerto Rican. I don't know if anyone else on the call has some Latinx connections, or, identify as Latinx, but I'd love to hear how you fit in, how you see privilege, white privilege, or what you're experiencing from that vantage point.
It's really interesting, because I kind of don't know where to start. I just recently learned.
Let me say this. Part of the conversation yesterday that we had, which was really good, was about colorism. You mentioned like the caste system, but we talked about colorism that happens within Latina communities, Latinx communities, and, class, and bringing, marrying lighter to access some of that white privilege. Like,
okay, so I'll start there. Is that because my father-in-law, he has a sign that he uses when he wants to talk about people who are darker than him, or darker in the, yeah.
Okay.
I something like this. And I was like, well, darker skin. I'm like, and Dad, what does that matter in this conversation? I found out a couple years ago that my father-in-law's family didn't want him to marry my mother-in-law because they thought she was too dark. Mm-hmm. I know my mother-in-law spent a lot more time. I mean, my husband's family's got some good melanin. Like, that man steps outside and he is bronze. I step outside, I am a lobster. But my mother-in-law spent a lot of time outside as a younger woman. She looked darker. You look at her now, she has color in her skin, but she looks as light as I do, right? Mm-hmm. But his family didn't want him to marry her. I also found out just this past winter that her mother worked for another family. They won't say in what capacity exactly that she helped care for the home, but they haven't put a label on that, and they haven't been willing to discuss it yet. So I also believe that that's another part of it, that they, like I said, I don't know what it is about getting older. They're getting sort of more honest with us and telling us more of the history. But I come home from these conversations and I have to discuss it with my kids, because I don't want this conversation to come up all of a sudden. You know, I mean, they already know the sign for darker skinned people, and my kids all go, "You can't do that, Papa. You can't do that."
Mm-hmm.
But it's all of these other pieces that we're learning about, and I need my kids to know that this is in their family, and this is the way that they talk about it, and this is the way that we're going to talk about it, and this is our family, and this is the way that we're going to talk about it. Because in the discussion that I haven't watched from yesterday, but when they were talking about how prevalent it is within the Latinx community, and the ways that I didn't really understand that, and it's sort of all coming to a head in my own family, and it's hard for me to be able to explain it to my kids, because this is why I'm doing the work.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have we should just have a whole conversation on colorism. I don't have a brown paper bag, but yesterday we did have one in the conversation, and it's hard to explain the brown paper, but you can, Google it. But, we talk about, even in the Black community, having, the brown paper bag test is, if you are lighter than that bag, then you're, light is right. And you're accepted into spaces. And if you're darker, then you're not. So, but that happens, I mentioned, like, in the Netflix show, The Indian Matchmaker. Like, I was watching and I was like, oh, this is interesting. But the matchmaker kept saying, oh yeah, she or he, they're fit, they're tall, they're fair, da da da. And I was like, what does she mean fair? Hold on. And then I'm reminded, I was like, she's talking about they're fair skinned, like this is acceptable. She's not dark. And I'm like, it's all over the place. And so yes, in Latinx communities, that skin color, coming forward, and people being strategic about marrying lighter, or the punishment if you have dark babies, or the relief when your babies come out from older generations, when your babies come out light. And again, that white skin privilege, that light skin privilege is, very much in line with this conversation. So there's some recommendations. Susanna put a recommendation in the margin and in the chat. So I think there is a video that I've been holding on to around colorism, wanting to get a chance to bring this up a little bit. So we'll have a whole discussion. Samantha, I know this is something that you navigate. I assume when I'm interacting with a Black woman who's light skinned, I'm like, I know you've been through it, sis. I know you're going through it. I already know. Dark skin too, because that's what happens. These are our experiences. And I fully acknowledge that, because I'm like caramel, I fall in the middle, and I actually don't, I have not, I just don't deal with it. But I see it all the time. Kenya, do you want to share? So you're Latina, I see.
Absolutely, absolutamente. Thank you so much for this platform. And first, my apology for missing the beginning of this conversation. But I do identify as an Afro-Latina and an Afro-Caribbean and an African-American. And there's layers to this.
Yeah, we talked about that.
On the side of my family that's Afro-American, in terms of my mom, same parents, 13 children, half of them are light, half of them are dark, and their experiences are completely different. And even to this day, they are estranged based on those differences, because of the light ones had preferential treatment, and they sort of disown the darker ones and the children of the darker ones. That's on the African-American family side, right? But in my work, I speak Spanish, I speak English. My notes can go back and forth, and I'm from New York City. And I moved to Maryland about 5 years ago. In New York City, I didn't find it as much as I do here. Because in New York City, there's a large Caribbean population. There's lots of different kinds of people that come from different places, and people begin to understand that. Here, I find it, I was actually, even professionally, personally, it doesn't matter. I can be in an environment where everyone is speaking Spanish, My client is speaking Spanish. My client hired me because I speak Spanish. And my client can be light-skinned than me. The janitors will speak to my client in Spanish in my presence and speak to me in English, as if my skin does not include me. But it's not that they saw a client folder. It's not that they checked with her that she speaks Spanish. There's an automatic assumption that when we're here in the United States, when we're here in Maryland, there are no Black people that speak Spanish. And it's like everywhere I go, I have to reintroduce myself. I went hanging out to a Spanish club in Maryland where I was probably one of maybe 4 darker skinned people. Everyone else was from South America, not so much from the Caribbean. And we were waiting in line, women were talking. There was like a woman who hands out, gifts, like maybe lotions and things like that in the bathroom. So there's chit chat in the women's room and everyone's chit chatting in Spanish. And when I jump into chit chat in Spanish, someone immediately turns around and looks at me and asks me in Espanol, "You speak Spanish?" And I have to respond to her, "Do you speak Spanish?" And it's really frustrating that my skin color does not admit me into a social club, right? Even though I can have a license and a badge to work in a hospital, to navigate advocacy for my clients, to go through all of the other work that everyone else does. And people immediately speak to me in English, speak about me in Spanish in my presence to my client. It's like constantly I have to wear a badge. I have to wear a badge. I have to wear a badge, and be educating of other people, and be humble, and be courteous. And there's times when, there's just so much of an uphill battle that I don't have that patience, because right now you're interfering with my capacity to do my job in the way that I want to do it, And for the most part, a lot of the people that I've seen, they make fun of my accent because sometimes Latin American Spanish has differences in dialogue and pronunciation than standard Spanish. So there's also that. And I think because I have had what they call good hair and long hair, I kind of had some passes, but when my hair was cut, I didn't have those passes again. So there's so many subtle layers, and when you're in the club and when you're not. Oh, yeah. And you have to be willing to educate people on a constant basis, and then be bombarded with, "Oh no, I'm not racist, mija," with like a colloquial term to make you feel like, "Oh, that was just nothing. You're my negrita." Like, that we love you, but you have to also know that you're going to tolerate this foolishness on a regular and consistent basis. And so it's my life work to educate people. And sometimes it's tiring. And so I salute you all the time for what you're doing here. And I think that it's important for the people who are here that are learning, because what pisses me off, if I can really just say it like that in this space, yes, is the amount of times that people say, "Oh, I didn't know." And it's like, you lived on the planet for 4 decades. You lived on the planet for 5 decades. So, I understand that ignorance is a thing. We can be ignorant of whatever we're ignorant of, but I don't understand how you can bump into people on a regular basis for 4 decades or 5 decades and not understand the impact of someone being invisible and constantly having to wear a badge to explain who the F they are. I have to constantly explain who I am. There are these terms, even within the Latin community, of caste. It's really a caste. Because I have the skin that I have, and because my hair is the texture that it is, it can straighten. So that's another thing. If your hair can straighten really well under blow drying, that's another kind of like, you get a step up. You get 5 extra bonus points, right? Like, you get access to things that you didn't have access to. It's like a social club. So they would give me another name, like, "Oh, you look Indian." They would give me another name. It's not like, "No, you don't. You're not like Black like the other Black. You're now like another something." And so we have these nicknames in Espanol that sometimes, if you don't listen to it properly, it can sound like it's sweet, but it's very derogatory. It is very derogatory. And, you know, sometimes I have challenges because I have light-skinned cousins who use the word nigger very, very freely, very, very openly. And I understand in the context of our family conversation that we can do those things, but I feel embarrassed for them to be heard outside in public and be misunderstood by people who don't understand, right? Because all of these things, you know, it gives somebody else the impression that, oh, I can say that. Oh, she's very light skinned and she has straight hair. Oh, you know, they're laughing about that, but they don't understand that within the Latin community, I don't even think Latin is a race, but that's another conversation. There's specifically Black, specifically white. Latin is about an ethnicity, but they've kind of created this little tangent for us, which causes a lot of confusion. But within this amalgam, right, of people who speak the same language, there are layers of nonsense.
Lots of diversity, lots of differences, lots of tension.
And absolutely. And it's subtle. And that's the part that's insidious, because the same word, like my grandmother can say negrita, right? Or Celia Cruz can sing a song, negrita. Negrita is a word for a Black girl, right? But when Celia Cruz sings negrita, I feel empowered. But there's somebody else who can say negrita to me and I don't feel that same way. It's the same word, but it's the intonation of the word and the context of how they're using it that can change the connotation and all of those things associated with it. So it's hard for you to like remove words from the lexicon, because the words have love and they have history and they have, you know, this part of culture that is like, yeah, I'm proud to be a negrita. I'm proud to be that. But there's certain people that cannot call me negrita. And then they want to play the card. Well, I didn't know. Then what's your problem? Why are you upset? Because it's the body language and it's the subtle things that I can't always codify when I'm explaining to them if they don't want to be honest and own up to their BS. So that's the part that I wanted to add to this, you know, that a lot of times when I come into spaces, there is an automatic assumption that I don't know crap about Espanol. I don't have a Spanish surname. Like, it's not a reality that there are, you know, brown-skinned people that speak Spanish. There are brown-skinned people across the planet that speak multiple different languages, you know. And I think that in this environment here in Maryland, DC, and Virginia, we just don't have enough diversity for people to be exposed to this reality. I was talking to a teacher friend in the public school system, and she was so stunted, a white woman, about how to teach Spanish to Black kids. She was like, how am I going to make this relate? And it was like, well, there's how many thousands, millions of people on the planet that are Black that speak Spanish? Why not talk about the Hondurans, talk about the Brazilians, well, they speak Portuguese, but talk about the Dominicans, talk about all of the Black people on the planet. They're Black people that are born and raised in Africa that speak Spanish. Yes. They colonized across the planet. And so the automatic assumption I know through the media is a certain color, a certain hair texture. And that goes somewhere else, because some of my light-skinned cousins who have what they call a rougher hair texture don't have a good time either. Their light doesn't absolve them of their hair texture. So these are the things that we contend with as a Black woman. If I go to an event and my hair is not straight, some of my family members treat me differently than if I go to an event and my hair is in its natural curl pattern. It's not just skin. There are these subtle things that if you're on the outside, you may not fully pick it up if you're not opening yourself up to really notice the things that are not being said. And a woman who has been, like me, experiencing these things, you will see it on your face. And if you learn to see it on their face and see it in their body language, you can address it to your clients. You can know when your client has just been dismissed in a flip of a second, and she's so accustomed to being dismissed, and she knows that if she opens her mouth, that might be the difference for her getting services. then that will help you to stand in for her and be subtle to those changes in her body language, just like the subtle changes in her body language when someone wants to pump her with drugs and that wasn't part of her birthing plan. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. That, I think that the way that you brought it back around to birth work is really important. This is what you said, like the subtleties, it's so layered and subtle that this is exactly why I often say white women very well are probably not the right people to be in the birth space with people of color, because there's so many things you can miss, and so many things, like there's so much nonverbal communication, or in the language, there's so much that is there. And people of color, like those families will hire you sometimes because they think that you're going to be, as a white person, going to be more protection. Like, oh, if you're in the space, they'll listen to you. The white nurse will listen to you. And that's, their choice. But there is so much going on culturally, and people are experiencing so much hurt and harm and being dismissed and being ignored, that sometimes we do it, they describe it as internalized racism. We do start to want to be what we're not in order to access white privilege. So, I have a curlier, like a loose curl texture. I can wash and go. And I also have really long hair. So if it's straight, I know that gives me access. People respond to me differently. And I can use it because I'm also caramel colored. People typically, I live in South Florida. People typically think I'm Dominican. They're always trying to speak to me in Spanish. I know not in one single word. Well, I know sí. That's it. I don't know anything else in Spanish, not a lick of it. And I'm also a fat Black woman. So I have to use my privilege when, if I want to not have to be categorized or diminished or ignored. Because if you got that long hair, that curly hair, it's like, oh, girl, you got something. You're a little bit different. You're not that Black person. Oh, you're a lawyer. There's definitely ways that we fit ourselves into the system to access it and to shield ourselves and protect ourselves, so we're not absorbing so much harm and discrimination. We take it on and off. In some ways it's code switching. You're welcome, Jenny. Sometimes it's code switching. Sometimes you're just accessing because you're like, I'm surviving and I need to make this path easier because I'm doing some other hard stuff. So let me straighten this hair. So let me show up. But also because you don't want to feel the negativity from family and friends. So there's a lot of ways that we're all managing within the discrimination, the prejudice, and the racism that we're living amongst. So thank you so much, Kenya. I think we're going to have a whole conversation about this.
Yes.
And probably those of us who are BIPOC probably just need to have our own conversation, like privately, to be able to unpack some of this stuff with one another, which is another thing that happened around the red table. It's like Jada was asking, like, how do I, as a Black woman, like when I show up in this space, what do you want me to say? What can I do to help you? How can I lift you up? And that might be a nice little next step for us, is to be able to get into a space and we can find a way that we can support you. Because I felt that in my heart for you, Kenya, that like you're always having to fight and prove yourself in these spaces. We all know what that's like, but it's layered, and for some it's a constant fight. Like you don't ever really get a space where you have a break, which is one of the things that came up in the conversation yesterday. And I know we have to go. I have to speak on a Lamaze panel in 35 minutes. But one of the things was, your home, the concept of being at home, and your home being kind of like a safe space where you can come and you can unburden, you can, it's like taking off your bra. Everybody knows that. You walk in the door and you're like kicking off your shoes and taking off your bra. For those of us who are people of color and are Black and we're experiencing racism outside our door, when we come home, it's the safer space where we can be ourselves, and maybe we're speaking our language, letting our hair down. We don't have to prove anything to anyone. But one of the conversations that came up yesterday was the idea of having Black friends or people of color friends. And I said, well, here's my question to you. The people who you would call as a Black friend, have you ever been in their house? If you have never been in their home, I would think maybe y'all are not friends. Y'all might be friendly, y'all might be co-workers, you might be peers, because see, we're not walking around the earth just mad. We're gonna make connections with people. But typically that private space, that being in someone's home, that's sacred. Not have you hosted them in your home, because we'll go to your event and da-da-da-da-da, but have they been in your home, in your inner circle, in the place where when you close the door, you can let it all hang out. You know, if you have not really experienced that, if they're not talking to you about race and the hurt and the pain, like you know, if you're not a place where they unpack some of the things that they experience in a day around race, you know, they might be, you know, friendly, but I would challenge whether they are, you know, they see you as a friend. You might see them as a friend, but I wonder if you're in their inner circle, and you know, probably just so you all do your assessment. But that was a good part of our conversation yesterday. So I'll make sure that the recording is posted to really assess who are you having these conversations with. How open are you? How much anti-racism work are you doing? Is your work just all external, or are you actually doing it in inner circles with the people in your household? I know we got COVID-19, but are you also having these conversations about race in your friend circle with people who may not exactly be gung-ho about being anti-racist? Are you still showing up and being yourself and doing the anti-racism work in those spaces that are a little bit more challenging? So that is one of the questions I'll post up today in the group is, what are you going to do this week to dismantle white supremacy? In your home, in your friend circle, in your workspace? What are you going to do this week to work towards dismantling it? Some of it, your answer might be you showed up to this talk. You know, you watched the video, but the encouragement is for you to actually do something outside of this space where you might be uncomfortable, to open up and help people along their journey, sharing, you know, a link, having the conversation, sharing your personal story of how you knew the moment you knew you were racist and you chose to be anti-racist. Sharing those stories can be really powerful. So that is all that I have right now. Is there, as we close out, is there anything that someone wants to share before we hang up that is really at the top of your heart and you believe it's important for us to leave with it? A parting thought. Now, Kenya, I'm gonna assume that you were saying much love. I told you I don't speak Spanish. I'm pulling on the French in me, girl.
I just look forward to future calls because I think we touched on a lot of places in this conversation where we could further break things down. And you also mentioned that, Reve. Yeah, and I definitely look forward to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been thinking about doing like a BIPOC call, but also colorism is just one of those things that it's like, let's talk about racism. That's what, you know, but eventually you do have to start peeling back that layer and kind of dealing with the other ways that we're experiencing harm for sure within this bigger context. So we will do that. Thank you all for taking time. Thank you so much for showing up. We can't do this if you don't show up. So I'm really, really grateful for sharing your stories and taking time away from your family. I hope you all stay well. I recognize that we're in a pandemic and we're in this together. So hopefully resource sharing will continue. I will try to save some of the links what we've shared in the chat for recommendations. I'll post the code switch video that you provided, Susanna. And I feel like, oh, and then Mia, the link for your business. You're new to the community. I want to make sure, let me copy that. That we help you get connected so that you're not on your own. Are you in the larger DC doulas group? And like on the referral list recommendation, like?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll message you. I'll message you offline so you can.
Okay.
I want to make sure you're on the list. Okay.
Thank
you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. Mwah, mwah, mwah.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you for the
Bye.
space.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.